You can find out what a recruit's overall is in EA Sports College Football 25. Do you want to know how to find out? Let's do it. But first, in order to understand these tips for recruiting, you're going to have to know the new recruiting features that are in the game. And I'm sure you've all watched a bunch of videos on this already, so I'll spare you the time and we'll just cover the important parts. The campus huddle goes way more in depth than I will on this, so you guys can read more about it if you want to. Recruiting is now done in 3 stages: the discovery, pitch, and close stage. In the discovery stage of recruiting, you'll be focusing on learning as much as possible about each player and finding out if they're a good fit for your program. During the pitch stage, you'll be selling your school to each player by, well, pitching. And lastly, in the close stage, you'll be scheduling visits and attempting that final push to ensure that the recruit chooses your school over a different one. Now that we laid the groundwork for recruiting, where do we start? Well, to be the best recruiter, you first have to understand your team and your overall goal. First, you gotta start by picking a playbook. And that can be any playbook you want. There's a ton of new options on offense and defense for playbooks in the newer game. Or you can even just let it ride with the original team playbook. The playbook that you select will change your team needs though. For those of you that are new to the channel, I'm going to be rebuilding Kennesaw State for my first rebuild. And they run a pistol offense. If I was, for instance, to make them run a spread offense, then I would have to completely change my recruiting composition of my team and my strategy for the recruiting and transfer portal. So selecting which playbook I choose first is going to significantly impact which players I even attempt to go for. So just do yourself a favor now, and whether or not you want to change your playbook, just figure out what it currently is so you don't waste your time looking for prospects who aren't going to be a scheme fit. So you picked your playbook and you're ready to start looking for recruits. Again, your main goal in the first stage is to find out as much information as possible and as quickly as you can to be able to gather that information to be used in later stages, and could be a determining factor in keeping that recruit even on your board. One way to do recruiting is by using your school pipelines. Pipelines were in a previous version of the game, so I won't be explaining the use of pipelines, but they have been reworked a little bit in College Football 25. There's no longer one pipeline for each state. It's now a regional thing. So instead of a pipeline being overpowered, like in the state of Florida, now there's multiple pipelines in Florida. There's Central Florida, South Florida, and even like in Texas, there's East Texas and North Texas. This is really an awesome change and really is going to help to balance out some of those hot spots for recruiting. Each pipeline is also now going to have a tiered ranking system based on historical data. And this is just such an awesome feature because it really shows the depth that EA put into this game. And on top of that, each school is also going to have that same tiered system for their pipeline level. That's also based on historical data and will never change. So basically, schools that are amazing at recruiting in one region historically will continue to be that way in this game. So my Kennesaw State Owls are just going to get straight up bullied by Georgia and Georgia Tech. Something I haven't seen a bunch of others talk too much about though is how each coach also has specific pipelines tied with them. And this also provides a boost to recruiting and is a determining factor in how schools hire a coach. In the screenshots we see here, we see that both head coaches and coordinators all have these pipelines. And other abilities that are shared by coaches stack. So why wouldn't recruiting pipelines? We'll have to wait and see when we play the game if your staff's pipelines make a significant difference when they all match and are the same location as your school. But I'm sure it's going to be very hard to make all 4 of those pipelines match. But it does sound like it would give your school a pretty sizable advantage in recruiting in that region. But on the other hand, you could look at it in the way of it could be nice to hire some coordinators or maybe even have your head coach's pipeline be all 3 of them in a different region than your school's pipeline, because your school's pipeline won't change and you could get a nice little cumulative benefit in a second pipeline if your head coach and your coordinators all match. So for instance, say you wanted to run a spread style of offense and you want fast players. Well, you know that South Florida, that region, has a lot of fast players. So if you were to put your head coach and maybe sign some coordinators in the South Florida area, you could bring some of those faster players, get a pipeline going, and bring them up to your school wherever it is. So it's going to be kind of interesting to see, of those two strategies, which one's kind of a little bit more beneficial. You guys are going to have to let me know when you try it in the comments. Let me know which one you think is the best option. The next thing to consider is your school grades. There's 14 school grades that are pretty much the same as the old previous versions of college football, but there is one new one, which is brand exposure, which is basically a sports version of NIL. I'm not going to individually go over each one of those 14, so if you want to pause it, feel free, and you can read the rest of them. Next would be motivations. So as you learn more about each player, you're going to discover that they have 3 motivations that are the main driving factors of them wanting to commit to a school. So these motivations will be displayed in the bottom right of the screen here, showing a green check mark to be one of their 3 motivations and a red X if they don't care about that aspect. This same screen is also where you can find out the recruits overall. You're probably saying, wait, there's no overall displayed on the screen. And at first I'd say you're right. But you can use some context clues here to figure out what that is. But first, I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. So if you guys have been enjoying the content that you've been seeing so far, make sure you smash that sub button so that you guys can get a top 5 recruiting class before the rest of your friends. But anywho, the part you need to look at is right on this screen. It's the playing time grade. Look at the definition here of playing time from the deep dive of Dynasty. The campus huddle says each grade has a unique set of grading criteria. For example, playing time is graded on a per player basis. The player's overall or projected overall, if they're a recruit, is compared to the team's roster to project how many years it will take for them to become a starter. Actions you take on the recruiting trail will impact the playing time grade of both recruits and players on your roster. So for instance, looking at this Michigan State team needs, we see that their starting QB is an 81 overall. This is just an example. So if they would have a recruit that would have an A+ playing time rating, that would mean that their recruit is going to start basically immediately if they're an A+. So that means that their overall would either be an 81 or higher to even give them the grade of an A+. Because if they were a 72 overall or lower, there's no way they'd have an A in general, and their playing time would be more like a C or maybe a D. Because it grades on how fast it's going to take that specific prospect to pass the specific starter on your team for first in the depth chart. So a 9 overall difference between a starting quarterback and the recruit is going to be quite a long time before the backup would even see playing time, especially because of this example anyway, the 81 overall quarterback's a sophomore. So he's going to be here a long time. This recruit's going to be waiting for 2 or more years for them to start, unless there's some sort of injury or transfer portal or something. But one thing I would be cautious of a little bit with this method is seniors. I would ignore the seniors overall at all, because I'm assuming that the game would also ignore their overall, since the recruit would not even join the team until the senior already graduated. So you should really only be counting juniors and less. But this is a way to find out a rough estimate of their overall, even really, really early in the recruiting period. Because as we see in this screenshot over here, we're not even at their top 8 yet. And you already see that their playing time is a C+. So this Brian Hale is just kind of middle of the road for a 3-star. This knowledge probably won't be enough to be an exclusive factor for taking somebody immediately off the board if they have a D or a C in playing time, but it could be a way to show you who's a little bit more valuable at the beginning of recruiting, so you know where to prioritize your points in the early weeks of the season, so that you're kind of using your points on the people who are most likely the highest overalls. Because those are the guys you really want to prioritize, getting as many points into them as possible, getting them to be interested, and in the end, ideally, committing to your program. There are 5 ways that you can recruit somebody. You just got to be very careful with how you spend your points, because you really aren't going to have that many, especially true if you're a small school. So a 1-star school like Kennesaw State, the deep dive blog says that in preseason, you're only going to have about 350 recruiting hours compared to a 5-star school who would have about 1,000 hours. Like, that's a pretty significant difference. And another interesting point if you look at the wording here, it talks about that is an example of in the preseason. Well, then, just in the same subheading, it says that in the preseason, you don't have to spend time preparing for games, so you will have significantly more hours to recruit in the preseason. So that means in the regular season, a one-star school is going to have significantly less than 350 hours. And if you have a max of 50 hours, potentially up to 70, on a recruit per week, that doesn't leave a lot to go around if you've got 35 recruits on your board. So that's going to be pretty challenging to kind of divvy up those points there. Because that 350 is for the preseason, not the regular season. So just make sure you don't waste those hours, because that could be the difference in committing the stud player to your program to help change the tradition there, or hiring the local coffee shop Joe Smith to be your quarterback. So using those points will basically help you to slowly discover the player's abilities over time. This, though, is only going to be their top 10 ratings for their specific archetype. It's interesting to know that because it's not their top 10 attributes in general. So you might never really figure out the strength of your elusive back or the coverage skills of your speed rushing linebacker, because those attributes really aren't relevant to their archetype. So you're going to have to wait until National Signing Day for them to join your team and find out if you found the next legendary two-way player. You'll also have to wait until National Signing Day to discover what the player's developmental ability is. There is one coach ability that you can unlock to help give you a chance to find out what their dev trait is after they're at their visit, but it's only a chance of finding out that dev trait, and plus, in my mind, we already talked about how important the recruiting points are, but how many points you have to invest to, one, offer a scholarship, get into the player's top 5, schedule a visit, have him come to your visit. All 4 of those things require a lot of points and a lot of focus on that player. Do you really want to then find out his dev trait's normal and then drop him from your board? You know, we put a lot of effort into even getting to this point. You're probably just going to ride it out. You might not use as many points on him as you were if you find out his dev trait's not what you thought it was, but you're probably still going to be trying to sign this guy, considering you already gave him a scholarship. So to me, it doesn't really save you a lot of time to even worry about unlocking that trait. Something you will find out, though, by scouting is the player's physical and mental abilities, if they have them. I think the sports team did a great job of disguising whether or not people have abilities and whether they have all of them or not. You see on this screen here, the player looks like they have 8 hidden abilities. As you slowly learn more and more about the recruit, we find that he has less and less of them, and then we find out that he really only has 2 mental abilities in the end. You also find out that this guy is a bust. You see to the left of his player icon, there's a red bust symbol. So he is not as good as we thought he was going to be. Doesn't mean he's necessarily terrible, but he's not as good as we thought he was, or he's not as hyped up as he was coming out of high school. We can also see that this player right above that bust symbol is a deal breaker. Deal breakers, we've had them before. They were in College Football 14, so I don't really have to super explain them, but they have been reworked a little bit in the newer game. Basically, the deal breaker is a way of the recruit wanting some specific requirement to be met, whether it may be playing time, coach prestige, championship contender. You have to hit the level that he has specified that he wants to have. And in the old game, once you hit that level, or if you kept above that level, you were able to talk to him, recruit him, commit him to your team, you were good. In the new game, that deal breaker stays with him forever. So you will have to continue to meet those requirements the whole time he's on the team, because if you don't, he might decommit from you and go sign somewhere else, or if you've already committed him and signed him and then break his deal breaker, he could leave to go to the transfer portal. So it's just something also important to keep in mind. But I'm not really going to go to the transfer portal because this is mainly a recruiting video. But if you want me to make a transfer portal video or answer some questions on it, just leave a like and have a comment down there asking me with whatever question you guys have. The next stage is the pitch stage of recruiting, and this is basically where our recruits have been scouted real well, we know a lot about them already, and you basically just have to convince them that your school is the right school for them. So there's 2 ways to do that. You can soft sell them and you can hard sell them. A soft sell is kind of a low risk, low reward type thing, where you might not know that much about the prospect and you don't really want to risk anything, so you use soft sell and you can get a little bit of a bonus every week. Hard sell, on the other hand, is more of an all-out method where either you know a bunch about this person, you know exactly what he's interested in, and you can hard sell him exactly on what he's interested in, and that'll give you a significant boost for him being interested in your program. But if he's not interested in what you're interested in, or you don't really know that much about him, using the hard sell is more of a risky move because it has a pretty large penalty if you guess wrong. So it's kind of more used in desperation, where it's kind of like a last ditch effort to try to just squeeze in there and get this prospect. But ideally, you're only using it when you really, really know that player well, or else it's pretty risky. The last stage is the closing stage, where you're going to be scheduling your visits and hopefully afterward acquiring some verbal commits. The interesting part, though, is that the scheduling a visit uses 40 hours of recruiting. And now it says that those 40 hours of recruiting aren't going to be used during that week that you schedule the visit. It sounds like the 40 hours will be used during the actual week of the visit. So when the prospect's actually at your game, which makes sense because you're going to be choosing what things he does there, what you talk about, who he sees, where you go. You know, you're going to be planning the whole day around that prospect to make him have the best day possible. So those 40 hours will be used well. But also during that visit, you can only have up to 4 recruits going to the same visit in the same week. So you're really going to have to kind of be a little cautious on who you choose and when you choose them, because it's going to take a while to get to the top 5 first off. And then once you get there, you know, it might be already the back half of the season and there's not that many weeks left in the year to be only a home game or a bye week to be able to have them even come. On top of that, you also have to be careful what games you schedule them to come see. Because if you have them come see you play an FCS team, it's not going to be very memorable for that recruit, since you're most likely supposed to win that game, and by a pretty heavy margin. So if you would go and you'd win, the recruit really wouldn't be that impressed. But if you'd go and lose, he might completely write your school off in general, because you should not be losing to the FCS teams. But on the other hand, if you have your recruit come to a top 25 ranked game, playing against a team who's better than you, or playing against a rival, then that recruit might be highly interested, and you might get a lot of benefit if you win that game. But you just as well might get a pretty decent downside if you lose that game. So they all have pros and cons, and you kind of have to weigh your, risks versus reward to see what weeks you want to have those prospects come in. And same thing with, you only have 4 guys. Do you want to put your top 4 guys all in the same week and then lose that week and risk losing all 4 of the commits that you wanted? Or would you rather spread them out? So if you lose one game, you might not lose the rest of them, and you might not lose all the prospects. That's going to be up to you guys to decide. But overall, I think EA Sports just absolutely went crazy with this game. I think they knocked it out of the park. It looks amazing. Sights and sounds looked amazing. The gameplay looks solid. I just can't wait to get my hands on and actually play it for the first time with you guys. So let me know, what team are you guys going to be rebuilding first? I'm doing Kennesaw State. Are you guys with me in that? Are we taking the Owls to the national championship? Or are you taking a different team? Let me know which one. But I hope you found the video to be new and interesting. The tips, I put a lot of effort into them. So hopefully you enjoyed them. But hey, I'll see you guys in the next one.